Okay, recording is now in process. So welcome everyone to our first of, I'm hoping, many virtual discussions of freshwater mussels. My name is Bria Wimberly. I'm an environmental educator over at Discovery Center, but I mainly work for Audubon Mid-Atlantic. We are going to be talking about freshwater mussels and how they are so amazing and unique, and the collaborations that we have with other organizations, as well as the site that we have here, and the resources that we have to help propagate these mussels. Unfortunately, they're endangered and there's not many in our watersheds. So a lot of different science organizations came together and decided to grow these mussels and place them back out into our Delaware River and our Schuylkill River. So here at Discovery, we have been nursing mussels for the past 2 to 3 years. And we just received our new cohort of mussels, which is amazing as well. COVID has taken a toll, but we're finally chugging along. So I appreciate that. So we're going to be talking about the mussels and the body of water that our mussels are in, as well as a really cool collaboration that we have with another organization. So I'm going to allow our speakers to introduce themselves and say a little bit, and from there we'll get started with our slides. Now, throughout this presentation, feel free to use the chat to ask questions, and there'll be times where you can unmute yourselves and participate as well. All right, so Keith, if you don't mind introducing yourself first.
Thanks, Bria. So I'm Keith Russell, and I work with Audubon Mid-Atlantic as well, and also work out of the Discovery Center. And I focus on conservation issues that affect birds in urban areas, like migration stopover habitat, preserving water quality, collisions with buildings and other types of human structures, and trying to enhance our population of native plants.
Nice. Thank you, Keith. Libby, since you're square next to him, if you can go next.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name's Libby Vieira Cunha, and I am the Curator of Education at Philadelphia Contemporary. As Bria mentioned, we are collaborative partners on an exhibition that we have currently at Cherry Street Pier called Freshwater, which is a celebration of freshwater mussel. And our curator, who commissioned the artwork, is here with us today. So Kerry, if you'd like to speak a little bit more.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Kerry Bickford, and I also work at Philadelphia Contemporary as the Curator of Ecological Futures. So the Ecological Futures program has been around for, I think, exactly 1 year at this point. And the goal of the program for us is to commission artistic projects that draw on Philadelphia's specific ecology and also its ecological challenges and opportunities that are facing our communities, in order to create these site-specific projects that respond to these challenges and opportunities and present different versions of what our communal future could look like, whether those futures are hopeful, aspirational, utopian, chaotic. We usually leave to the artist to sort of explore all those different options. And we were delighted to do a lot of different partnerships in production of this initial commission called Freshwater, including one with the Discovery Center. So thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. Very awesome. So now we can start off with Keith. Keith is going to be chatting a little bit more about our site and the history behind it, and also present day, what's going on in our reservoir today. So Keith, you can take it away.
So welcome again, everybody, and thank you for coming. As Bria said, I'm just gonna begin by providing some background information about the Discovery Center and why the Discovery Center has been involved in work to promote freshwater mussels in the Philadelphia area. So the Discovery Center, for those of you who may not be that familiar with it, was created basically to serve as a base of operations for Audubon Mid-Atlantic, which is a regional program of the National Audubon Society, and the Philadelphia Outward Bound School, which is a regional program of Outward Bound USA. And Audubon's mission is to protect birds and the habitats they need to survive for the benefits of both birds and people. And Outward Bound's mission is to improve people's lives through challenge and discovery. And a lot of the work that Outward Bound is doing is conducted outdoors in natural settings. And because both organizations are involved in exposing people to nature and building understanding and respect for the natural world, working together to create and operate the Discovery Center has really been a win-win for Audubon and Outward Bound, programmatically, operationally, and financially. So the Discovery Center is located, again, it's located at the East Park Reservoir in the Strawberry Mansion section of the city. And it was built at that specific location for really two reasons. And the first reason that the site's, it's just a natural wonder. And it attracts a large number and a large variety of different types of birds, along with lots of other different types of wildlife. And this is due largely to the fact that it contains a really big 37-acre lake, which happens to be the largest lake in Philadelphia that's not connected to a stream or river. But it's a site that had been closed to the public for many decades because of safety and security concerns. So creating a center here really allowed the site to once again be open to the public, but in a way that was safe and secure and that enabled people to enjoy the site's natural beauty and be able to observe the many types of birds and other organisms that the site attracts. And the second reason why the Discovery Center was created at the reservoir was really to serve as an educational, social, and civic resource for the residents of Strawberry Mansion, which is a really densely populated neighborhood that has really for many years received relatively little public or private economic or social investment. So the Discovery Center, again, is actually part of a larger site called the East Park Reservoir, which was conceived in response to a really severe drought that occurred here in Philadelphia in 1869. And the reservoir was completed 20 years later in 1889. And that's about 133 years ago. And the entire reservoir site encompasses just a little over 100 acres. And the main reason it was created was to store drinking water for distribution to city residents. So over the years, the city has also constructed additional reservoirs to store drinking water in. But after the population of the city began to decline after about the 1950s, the city no longer needed to use the reservoir at full capacity. And almost half of the reservoir site was sort of put out of commission. And that change occurred sometime after the 1950s, but we don't have a precise date. And the unused portion of the reservoir complex remained unused until it was leased to Audubon and Outward Bound for the creation of the Discovery Center. So the Discovery Center currently occupies about half of the reservoir site, and the remaining portion of the site continues to be used by the city to store drinking water in. And that water is distributed now to city residents, mainly in Center City and South Philadelphia. And water was originally stored on the site in large open lakes or basins, and it's now being stored in really big round concrete tanks, which I don't have a good photo of, so you just have to imagine they're huge. They're really amazing. So the Discovery Center's most distinctive feature, of course, is the 37-acre lake, which we now call Strawberry Mansion Lake. And this lake is one of the 3 large basins that was originally used to store water in during the 1880s. When the reservoir was first opened in 1889, the entire site was almost completely free of vegetation, and it remained that way for many, many decades. But after the city stopped using the portion of the site that's now occupied by the Discovery Center, that unused portion slowly began to be taken over by nature. So trees and other types of plants began to grow, and many different kinds of birds, insects, mammals, reptiles, amphibians began to use the area. The lake had evidently always contained fish, which we think were pumped into it from the Schuylkill River when the lake was created originally in the 1880s. But in addition to fish, there are aquatic insects, aquatic plants that have also appeared in the lake. And today you can find 4 species of native fish in the lake, and they include pumpkin seed, sunfish, yellow perch, white catfish, and a species of catfish known as a brown catfish, which has now become really rare in the rest of the Philadelphia area. So the lake is currently only 8 feet deep, but it was much deeper historically. And for a variety of reasons, the lake was lowered in depth to 8 feet during the 1990s, and it remains at 8 feet today. And the lake receives no inflow from streams or from stormwater pipes. So it's maintained entirely by water from rain and snowmelt. In addition to the fish, the frogs, the turtles, aquatic insects, aquatic plants, the lake water also contains a large variety of microscopic organisms like blue-green algae, green algae, euglenoids, diatoms, cyanobacteria, and there's others in there as well. These organisms give the water a slightly hazy greenish tint, but the lake is otherwise clean. It's free from silt. It's free from pollutants because, again, it's only fed by rain and snow, and there's no storm drains to carry any water to the lake to pollute it. Because the lake contains clean water that's unpolluted, and it's not extremely deep, it's a place where freshwater mussels could also live. And freshwater mussels, as Bria was saying, once thrived in streams and rivers throughout the Philadelphia region. They don't anymore, but 200 years ago, there were 12 to 14 species that could be found in our streams and rivers, and they gradually disappeared for a number of reasons. One is that they were over-collected to use as bait. There were also dams that were created that blocked the movement of fish that helped to transport baby mussels to new areas. There were oil spills that destroyed them, and there was siltation and pollution that got into our waterways that was caused by basically development. And this has created conditions that has made it really difficult for mussels to survive. So as a result, there are very few mussels in our local streams and rivers today. But as filter feeders, mussels traditionally served a very important function in nature by removing tiny particles from waterways. And one adult mussel can filter over 10 gallons of water a day. And there was one mussel bed that was studied here in southeastern Pennsylvania that was able to remove 26 metric tons of solids from the water in a single summer season. So mussels naturally remove algae, other microscopic organisms, organic material, and all kinds of particulates from waterways. And by doing that, they keep our waterways much cleaner and improve the quality of the water for other types of organisms. So work to restore mussels in local waterways has been going on here in Philadelphia area for a number of years. And this work has been conducted by the Academy of Natural Sciences, the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, Philadelphia Department of Parks and Recreation, the Independent Seaport Museum, and the Philadelphia War Department. And all these organizations came together, as Bria mentioned earlier, in 2018 to form the Aquatic Research and Restoration Center in order to better coordinate this work. And much of the work that's currently being done is centered at the Fairmount Waterworks and at Bartram's Garden, where mussels are being bred for release into local waterways. But the baby mussels need to grow before they're going to be released. And the Discovery Center is one of a small number of sites where these baby mussels are now being grown. So obviously the cleanliness of the Discovery Center's lake, along with the fact that the site is gated and it's secure from vandalism, and the fact that it's very close in proximity to the Fairmount Waterworks has made it a really ideal location to use for mussel growing. And the Discovery Center is proud to be part of this program because mussels play such an important role in keeping streams and rivers clean and improving water quality. And this is one of the things that Audubon Mid-Atlantic is particularly interested in doing right now. So with that, I will send it back to Bria.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Keith. Yeah, really great information. The fact that the reservoir has been here for so long and, you know, it was untouched for a while, which is a good thing because now we have this environment today where we can nurse these mussels, help out the other animals within this ecosystem, as well as provide these hands-on STEM opportunities. So yeah, I think that's really awesome. Okay, so next up, I'm going to have Libby and Kerry talk about their collaboration with these mussels and the work that we've done in the past and really cool things that you're all doing today. So I'll stop right there and let you all take it from there.
Thank you, Bria. Let's get this started here. Okay, view. Oh, well, it was working before. Wait, try this again. Okay. Right. So I wanted to start off by introducing Philadelphia Contemporary. So Philadelphia Contemporary was founded in 2016, and we have a mission to connect the people and places of Philadelphia through art and partnership. So much like the exhibition that we'll be talking about today, we really produce all of our arts, programming, and exhibitions with others throughout the city. It's a wonderful model to be a part of. Now, today we're going to be talking about the exhibition Freshwater by the artist Jean Shin. And I wanted to start off the engagement by just looking at the artwork together. So I was hoping, I'm hoping that you'll all join me in observation around the artwork. One of the wonderful things about this artwork is it's a beautiful combination of arts and science together. And much as in scientific inquiry, a lot of artwork asks the viewer to start with observation. I'm going to share some photos of the artwork, and then afterwards, I'd like to come together and hear your thoughts and questions on the piece. So this is the artwork at its location at Cherry Street Pier. And just to ground a little bit of what you're seeing glass vessels. Each glass vessel contains a live mussel in it, and water is being pumped from the Delaware River up through the top of this fountain and going down through it, and then it gets filtered and pushed back into the river. Here is a close-up, so you can see the mighty mussel in its container here. And here's another picture. At the bottom of the main feature, this fountain, there's also this array of mussel shells that were made into buttons. And here's another close-up of that. And then much of what the artist has said about this exhibition is that it really is a living laboratory. And so the piece has evolved since it's been up. And here is a picture of it months later. And you can see that the glass vessels look very different because there isn't this algae that has grown. In addition to the main element, there's also these other sculptures that feature shells that were collected by the mussel maniacs. And they also have material that was collected from the waste stream with a partner rare. And on these sculptures, there are glass vessels that could contain water collected from the Delaware River. Here's another one of those sculptures. And another one. So I'm happy to go back to any of the images, but I'd like to see if we could just engage in a little bit of observation. I'll see if I can just pull up an image and be able to look at you at the same time, which I'm not sure if I can do. Yeah, here we go. So let me go back and let's start. Let me go, if I can go back, yeah. Start here. So I always like to start these observations without telling too much about the artwork, just to get your general thoughts. I will say that this artwork again is a celebration of the mussel species, but also a call to action about the importance of the mussel to the ecosystem of the river. And the artist Jean Shin noted that people often don't get a chance to think about what's under the surface of water. So it's also a lens into looking at water, the river, that you can see in the background here of the piece, and taking a part of something that's part of the ecosystem, often hidden, and bringing that into the forefront. So I'd love to hear any observations, thoughts, questions, and open it up. Please feel free to unmute or use the chat.
If I can make an observation, the bubbles, well, the glass bubbles, they remind me of, if I'm underwater and I'm snorkeling or something and I blow bubbles up, and the bubbles will eventually rise up to the top. But I find it, interesting how these bubbles are actually working in the opposite direction. Water is flowing down these bubbles with the help of gravity. And it just has me thinking more of, how things flow. And depending on the perception of it, it could flow up or it could flow down.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And these vessels are actually hand blown by an artist at the Wheaton Arts Center, and they look very organic in nature as well too. So that was very much a artistic decision to make sure that the pieces also had this kind of organic shape and element. A great observation.
So Libby, what is the timeline for this exhibit?
This exhibit's up through November 6th, so there's still some time to go see it. And of course, when you're there in person, it looks much different, but it's good to get a sense of what is interesting when you're first looking at it. I can speak a little bit to the mussel shells that are at the bottom of this sculpture. In observation and conversation with others around the artwork, people have noted that it looks maybe like islands or formations of the or water. So it's been some really wonderful observations. Those really do have a link to the ideas of overconsumption and the use of mussels being used as for lapels, and the fact that they were really overconsumed, and it killed a large portion of the species. So that's just a really incredible tie-in to illustrate that artistically.
And Libby, we had a great comment from Jeffrey too. I'm going to read it in case
Thank you.
in case you hadn't seen it. But Jeffrey was asking if buttons were typically made from mussel shells. I think, quoting Jeffrey here, I think it's interesting how the artist used an everyday object to connect to the mussels.
Yeah, Jeffrey, that is such a good point. I really love Jean Shin's work, and Kerry will speak a little bit more on the artist, because she really thinks about how we use materials, how we discard materials, and just about our relationship to everyday objects. And it really connects you more to the piece, I find personally. So your comment really resonates with me. I think often we don't think about the materials things are made of, and the shells, the button shells from this piece were actually from a factory in New Jersey that they had never been used. They were just stored there. They were discarded. There was no use for them. And Jean found an artistic way to also, I think, in a way, honor all of those mussels that have passed to have these buttons here. And so I think it's a really good point. I think Kerry could speak a little bit more on kind of the traditional relationship of what buttons were made out of. But from my understanding, mussel shells were a very popular material.
Yeah, are you speaking to Beth's question, Libby?
Yes.
Yes. So mother of pearl and mussel shell. Mother of pearl is sort of a catch-all term for a variety of different shells that were turned into to buttons. So you're absolutely correct that buttons were made out of that material. And a lot of times I'm not wearing a button-up shirt today, but a lot of times when you look at the shirts that we're wearing and they have that clear plastic, they're mimicking the look of what a mother of pearl button once might have appeared as. Though, as you'll see in this installation, they came in an incredible variety of colors and sizes. They were made with a variety of other materials, metals, bones, pretty much any kind of hard substance, wood that you could imagine. But in the beginning of the 20th century and sort of mid 20th century, as plastics really began to take over, a lot of these forms of button making were almost entirely lost, and buttons that were once considered to be incredibly valuable were replaced by something that was simpler to make and cheaper to manufacture, but also incredibly environmentally detrimental.
So, Libby, you mentioned the mussel maniacs. I wonder, is there any more information you can provide about them?
Yeah, so we did a shell collection and survey with Bria and Stacy Hefferman from the Fairmount Waterworks. And it was a really incredible day. As part of that experience, we collected the shells that are featured on these dead sculptures here. The parallel is that there's the live mussels in the fountain, filtering the water, highlighting the amazing work that they do under the surface, and also bringing to the foreground all the restoration efforts that are happening here in Philadelphia. These sculptures really look to the past. To me personally, I think it's incredible just how large they are, and learning about the lifespan of the mussel was something that was really interesting to me through that process. Bria, I don't know if you want to speak at all about that day and anything else.
Yeah, definitely. I can chime in.
Mhm.
Firstly, was very happy to have you all there, helping us look for live mussels. We go out to Palmyra Cove in New Jersey, and every time we go out there, we find live mussels, which is
Yeah.
amazing because if we go out to other surveys, we went to Wissahickon, Cobb's Creek, we may find one or two mussels, but they are thriving down there in New Jersey. Um, so just to, like you said, see that contrast of all of these mussel shells washing up to shore and, you know, finding someone who can use these shells. Um, and at the same time, finding live mussels and feeling some type of hope. You know, they found their habitat here, and we're hoping that, you know, later down the line, we can create more habitat for them and they can thrive and filter that water for us. And I think during that time, the watershed stewards joined us. So I know Beth is here right now. They were extremely helpful. I want to say that maybe 15 people showed up, and we found over 30 mussels that day. Yes. Oh, you're right. And Jeffrey is a steward. Yes. I don't know if you were there too, but yeah, we found so many mussels that day. It was, I think that was like one of the best days I've had going out there to Palmyra Cove.
Oh, we had so many shells we collected as well. Yeah, it
Mhm.
was pretty incredible. So, yeah, thank you again for all of your help. And um, as Kerry will speak to Jean's practice, she very much also likes to include others in the creation of her work, and to build that sense of community around the artwork, and to thinking about the subject matter more deeply. So I'm just so pleased we were able to do that.
Would it be helpful at this point, Libby, for me to chime in a little on Jean, or does anyone else
Yeah.
have any observations they want to make note of first?
See if I can get in the chat. Okay. I think we're good. Yeah. See if I can.
Thank you, Libby. I may turn my camera off just so people can maybe full screen the images and really focus on some of these samples of Jean's work. So Bria had asked me to just give a little bit more context on Jean and her practice. So I'm gonna start out just telling you about a few past works that I think help illustrate how she came to develop a piece such as the Freshwater Commission. And then we'll revisit some of these images. And Bria's touched, pardon me, and Libby's touched on some of these points, but we'll revisit some of these images just in light of everything that we've already talked about and in light of what you're about to hear about Jean. And we'll show you a few process images as well, just to give you a sense of how the piece came together. So Jean Shin was born in South Korea. So she's an American artist who was born in South Korea, raised in the United States. She currently works in Brooklyn and in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. And her process really focused and always focused on discarded objects and used objects. And she often collects these objects through a form of community process. So, and she uses these massive accumulations of everyday things to make monumental sculptures. And the ideas of these sculptures is often to reflect the history of those objects, how they were used, their ties to our social identities, and also increasingly their environmental impact and their legacies. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Libby. So an early example of this and some of the ways in which she incorporates waste, she's done a number of projects on plastic waste specifically. So this is an installation called Maize, spelled M-A-I-Z-E. And this was a project in which she used discarded soda bottles, plastic soft drink bottles, in order to create this maze that replicates a maze made out of a field of corn. She presented this piece originally in Iowa. So in doing so, she was interested in really just showing just the incredible quantity and landscape of plastics that we're creating for very simple purposes that have an immense legacy on this earth, of course. And then also thinking about the monoculture that is a lot of corn in the United States and how much corn and corn syrups have been incorporated into the diet. So she was sort of tying together that specific kind of environmental legacy in Iowa with a sort of larger cultural issue of overuse of plastic. And then Libby, if you want to go to the next one. And then this is just another instance of using those accumulated materials, but also really focusing on creating spaces of community gathering. So the tent-like form in this sculpture is actually entirely made of plastic stirrers, like you would put in your coffee cups. So those are just thousands and thousands of those red plastic stirrers you might see at a Starbucks. And they're creating this foundation for a tea house. And you can see on the left there, a little teapot set up where audience members could come and sit and consume a cup of tea and congregate and talk and think about the installation as they sat within it. And at the end, they were actually invited to hang their tea bags and dry them out in the sculpture. So she's usually working on a way in which to combine these objects with community and with getting people involved, whether they're gathering the objects or whether they're experiencing the final sculpture as a form of communal space. And then if we look at the next slide, in recent years in particular, Jean has been also really trying to pull from, very specifically from the environments she's been invited to work in. So this was a piece she did in 2019 in the Hudson River Valley at a space called Storm King Sculpture Center. And what you see here is a massive picnic table that's been constructed out of maple trees that had been naturally dying out due to a number of environmental factors, including weather changes due to climate change. So you can see behind the table this series of stumps. And these are trees that the organization that runs the sculpture park was planning to fell because they had basically begun to rot and become so ill that they could no longer survive. So she built these tables as a space to sort of gather and reflect on the life of these trees, and also used them as sampling sites where people would taste maple syrups that were tapped from other maple trees in the area that were healthy and then those that were struggling. So she was using the tables as a way to also engage the senses of scent and taste, and to create a space where people could really reflect on the history of the maple in the Hudson River Valley, because that is such an iconic tree and one that's so tied into diet there. And then you can also see behind these trees with the stumps are the plantings of the new trees that are being put up in the space where the old ones once existed. These are actually black gum trees, which are now better suited for the climate that we expect to see in the Hudson River Valley in the coming decades. So they were planting trees that they now thought would be hardier and better suited for the environment. And then the next slide, this was a project that Jean did post-COVID in 2021, or post sort of the initial lockdown, I should say, at Olana, which is a historic site in upstate New York, titled Fallen. And this is a piece that I think really sees a coming together of Jean's focus on community process, on material history, and also in current environmental factors. So Fallen, which is the tree on the rocks in the front, the house in the back is a historic estate. That tree in the front is a hemlock tree that had been felled in a recent storm at Olana. And that tree was planted by the estate's founder, who was an artist named Frederick Church. He was the founder of a landscape painting practice called the Hudson River School, which was dominant in the 19th century, and did a lot of those paintings really established a lot of initial understandings, visual understandings of westward expansion and American colonialization, and just sort of our understanding of America through landscape. So Frederick Church was an incredibly influential 19th century artist. And then he was also a devoted conservationist and environmentalist in his own local region. So these hemlock trees were planted by Church because the original initial hemlock forests in the Hudson River Valley had been nearly obliterated because the trees were instrumental in the leather tanning process in the 19th century. So the bark of the trees would be stripped off of the fallen trees and used in the process of tanning leather, which of course in the 19th century was a really significant product in terms of making saddles and making tack and making a lot of the materials of everyday life. So because the hemlock forests had been decimated, Frederick Church replanted fresh forests on the space of his estate. And those forests in our present day are now beginning to die out because of other reasons. So Jean took one of those trees that had died naturally and started to make a project reflecting on these conservation efforts of a past generation and how they tie into the generation that's working today. And if you could go forward to the next slide, Libby, just to give a closer look. So the tree has been covered in a shroud, and she uses the word shroud very intentionally because she thinks of it as a funeral garment for this tree that is made of upcycled leather remnants from our current textile industry that have been tacked on to the tree, all these sort of beautiful, colorful fabrics that are meant to evoke the colors of the house and the landscape. And underneath that, almost as a sort of shadow, is the bark that she has stripped off the tree, which demonstrates the sort of initial reason these trees were wiped out in the Hudson Valley for the sake of industry. And a lot of times increasingly she's been pulling on fashion specifically, which again, we'll revisit in the case of the buttons. Oh yeah, thank you. It's such a beautiful project, Bria. These photos hardly do it justice. And then as part of this project, what she also did is she was working with local community college students to track all of the hemlocks that were currently existing still on the Olana estate and to observe them for aphid infestation. So a lot of the reasons these current hemlocks are dying, the ones that were planted by Church as an effort to, sort of recover from another generation's sins, they're now dying out because of the aphid infestations that we've been unable to control. So they used this project as sort of a starting off point to work with young students and local environmentalists about what are currently causing the hemlocks to die out and to think about that and the stressors on these trees in the present day. So really trying to bridge the history of these trees, how they link to past materials and present conservation efforts, but also to draw some parallels, right, between a lot of the things that have not changed, how we're still really looking to make up for the different forms of overharvesting that we've perpetuated in the past, and how the work of kind of creating this conservation and doing this work of restoration is very much ongoing and very much something that always has to be tended to. And if you'd go forward, Libby. So I think you can probably see with new light now, this brings us back to Freshwater, which is the commission that Jean has done for Philadelphia in partnership with, it was commissioned by Philadelphia Contemporary and Delaware River Waterfront Corporation, but was really inspired by the history and ecology of the Delaware River. And also her starting off point, Libby, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. One of the sort of initial conversations that fed this piece was Jean learning about the mussel hatchery at Fairmount Waterworks and just the extraordinary amount of partnerships that had gone into restoring mussels in the Delaware River watershed and the importance that they held in the local ecosystem. So, I mean, we've been incredibly fortunate to work with the water department, with Fairmount Waterworks, with the Discovery Center, the Partnership for Delaware Estuary, the Independent Seaport Museum. We've just been so incredibly warmly greeted by all of these organizations and grateful for all that generosity. So drawing on the freshwater mussel hatchery and that work, and especially responding to the fact that at the time we were starting research on this hatchery had just been flooded in Hurricane Ida. So the need to restore the work felt all the more urgent. If you go to the next page, Libby. What also really spoke to Jean and tied into her was when in her research, she discovered that one of the initial ways that the freshwater mussels died out in the United States was because of overharvesting. And I know this looks very similar to a photo that Keith showed as well. So this photo was actually taken on the Mississippi River in Muscatine, Iowa, which was the hub of the freshwater mussel industry for making buttons out of shells, the pearl button industry. And you can just see the scale of collection that's happening on a daily basis in that river in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And freshwater buttons were really a craze. They were extremely valuable, and to have even sort of one on your lapel was really understood to be a status symbol. So there was just this immense desire to harvest them. And there was such an abundance of freshwater mussels that there was sort of this understanding along the Mississippi that there was no way to harvest too many. There was just going to be this constantly replenishing supply. until in the early 20th century, they started noticing extreme declines in the population and noticing that really we had begun to overharvest and that those populations to this day have never completely bounced back. And if you go to the next page, Libby. So for Jean, as somebody who really responds to intimate objects and uses them as a way to connect our behaviors and our everyday lives as stakeholders to these larger questions of conservation, of overconsumption and environmental stewardship, the buttons were really an important hinge for her for talking about the work being done to restore the mussels and thinking about our personal relationship to the Delaware River and also our responsibility to it. So on the right, you can see how these buttons are born out of shells. So you can see the sort of jagged edges. That's where the button blanks, so the circles, would have been punched out of the abalone in this case to create these shells, and then they're polished down, as you see. So that photo was actually taken by the Philadelphia Archaeological Society. This was a dig that they did under the Museum of the American Revolution. So these are buttons that were being fabricated in Philadelphia. And we found through our research a number of button factories that were being made in button factories that were sited in Philadelphia. And then on the left is actually a few photos that I took early on in the project of contemporary pearl buttons on sale in Fabric Row in Philadelphia. So they're not sourcing locally anymore because these species are so threatened, but this is absolutely an industry that's still ongoing. And as you can see, there's still mussel shells that are drawing from some of the textures of those species that you can buy to this day if you go down to some of the more kind of niche fabric shops in spaces like Philadelphia. And then if you want to go to the next slide, Libby. So for Jean, a real breakthrough, as Libby mentioned, was an organization called Materials for the Arts connected her to a warehouse in New Jersey that had thousands upon thousands of vintage pearl buttons from the 19th and 20th centuries that had never been used, that had been stored because they were understood to be valuable, but because of the mechanized processes we use for clothing nowadays, something like a pearl button, which was created through a 19th century industrial process and was fairly regular, but not as intensely regularized as a plastic button, could not be incorporated into contemporary clothing at the same scale that we make it today. So they were just sitting there for decades untouched. And drawing from just that, in that sort of horrifying bounty, Jean began to just sew them onto this sort of plastic netting, as you can see on the left. That's an early sample of hers. And then laying them out in context of the living freshwater mussels in these hand-blown glass vessels, as Libby mentioned. So on the right, you can sort of see early on in the process of creating those islands and what they would look like and organizing them around those globes so that those globes could be a reflection and a sort of aspirational look at what freshwater mussels are doing that these dead mussels cannot. And if you don't mind going to the next slide, Libby. So as you, I'm seeing Jeffrey's question. So Jean, the button stitching was done in Jean's studio. So that was done in the Hudson River Valley. That was not made on site. The glass was all blown at Wheaton Arts in New Jersey. They were a really close partner on this, but Jean was very involved in the design and the shape of those glass orbs. And it's interesting that people were calling attention to the shape of the bubbles. I love hearing what people call them. They're called many things. We think of them as bubbles, as organic shape, as jellyfish, as gourds. Jean also thinks of them as a sort of hourglass and sort of a representation of the passage of time and the way in which we are running out of time to combat the worst effects of climate change. So she really does think of the whole installation as an hourglass or a water cloth. In terms of buttons after the exhibit, Bria, Jean loves to reuse materials. All of these buttons, sewn button nets, will be returned to her. She doesn't know exactly yet what she's going to make of them next, but she always reuses her materials and incorporates them into future artworks. So they will almost certainly turn up in future art pieces. She just hasn't determined what those will be yet. And then if you want to go 2 slides forward, Libby, if you don't mind. I just also wanted to share some of those photos from the Mussel Maniacs and Bria and Stacy doing some of those scouting with us and collecting some of those shells. That was such an exciting part for us, especially in the context of how important community process is to Jean and her practice. And in the next photo, you can see probably some familiar faces. So we have Bria and Stacy in this photo. Libby is on the far right. We also have 2 Fairmont Waterworks interns who, Jess Thomas and Kiara Bucher, who were incredibly important in caring for the fountain over the course of the summer. they were helping us to monitor the mussels that are in the fountain and tend to them and make sure that they were thriving and not being harmed in their current environment. So it's really delightful to look back on this now and know how much more involved they were going to be in this artwork. And then the waste riverbeds, if you don't mind just moving to those, Libby, just to give some additional context for these, as Libby mentioned, they are made out of materials sourced from Revolution Recovery, which is a waste site in Tacony, Philadelphia, Tacony neighborhood, provided to us by Recycled Artists in Residency, or RARE. But also when making these pieces, Jean really wanted to use these as sort of dead riverbeds, right? As sort of dead counterpoint to the living fountain, or the potential of a living fountain with mussels filtering water in real time. So these were really meant to kind of be a sort of dark shadow of what the rivers would look like without any form of intervention, and just these accumulations of waste. And tying that again to the death of the mussels. And in making them, she also wanted to make sure that they reflected the different materials in our waste stream and the different harms that they cause. So this is the plastic one, which of course is sort of the shiniest, the least degraded, the one that feels the most permanent. Jean's done a lot of thinking on plastics. And then the next one is metals, right? These are also sort of industrial byproducts, super wasteful to create, but have a number of uses and will eventually degrade. And you can sort of see them beginning to rust and break down. And then the third sculpture is made of wood, which already you'll see looks so much more beaten down, so much more already kind of beginning to return to the earth and recycle into something, if you don't mind showing that, Libby. Yeah, exactly. So she also wanted to draw out how all waste is not necessarily created equal when you're thinking about the kinds of waste that are being produced and our relationship to them. And then if you don't mind flipping 2 more slides ahead, Libby, just to show a couple also background process images. We were working very closely with Fairmont Waterworks, Discovery Center. The mussels in this fountain were loaned to us from Discovery Center's baskets, so we're incredibly grateful for the trust that they put in us to take good care of them. These mussels were cycled out on a weekly basis. So we would go in, we would check on each of them, we would put them in that cooler with an aerator that you can see behind my hand there, and we would take them down to Independent Seaport Museum, place them in the river, and then take out fresh mussels to put in the fountain. And this was done for a few reasons. One was just to make sure that we had an opportunity to regularly check on them, see if they were showing any strain, any shell degradation, any signs that they were accruing harm over time. And also we were, when we were beta testing the fountain, we were concerned if for any reason they weren't getting enough food, or for some reason that portion of the Delaware was stressing them for any reason. We wanted them to cycle out on a weekly basis. The scientists said that they would go into some sort of permanent shock for being undernourished at a point of about 2 weeks. So we halved that and started cycling them out on a weekly basis so that they would never get close to being starved or having any kind of systemic shock that could really harm them in the long term. So the individual on a ladder is Sophie White, who's an incredible art handler and also has a background as an environmental educator. So she's really been crucial to us also in terms of tending and turning these mussels over every week. And that on the left is an eastern pond mussel in the palm of my hand that you can see there in the process of switching them out. So yeah, thank you again to Discovery Center for all of your partnership on this and your generosity. We've been honestly very overwhelmed with how open all of these partners have been to accepting an arts organization into the mix. That generosity has not gone unnoticed, and it's, I hope, really made Jean also an evangelist for freshwater mussels around the country and sort of thinking about their health and tying that back to the work that's being done in Philadelphia. So yeah, if anyone has questions with that additional context, please do chime in.
And while people think of questions, I'm going to post some future events that you can attend to. We have a Mussel Maniac event that's coming up where you can come and measure some of the mussels here at the reservoir. That will be this Saturday. And then next week, we'll have another panel discussion, including some other scientists in different organizations that are also part of this system. So let me put those in the chat, and hopefully you all will check them out.
I'd also love to chime in that, yep, you just put it in the chat. But we're co-hosting an event with the Discovery Center next week that dives more into the science behind everything. And we'd love to see faces there if anybody really wants to take a deeper dive into the science history.
Yeah, we're really excited for that panel discussion, especially because Philadelphia has some of the great minds around mussel restoration. And so we're really excited for that conversation on November 3rd at the Discovery Center. And yeah, thank you for all the comments and observations. And yes, Jeffrey, please do come by. The exhibition's up till November 6th. And every time I go by, it looks a little different. So it really is an evolving artwork. There's something really beautiful about the element of surprise when you have a living creature in an artwork.
Yeah, we're hoping to come by and visit too. I'm bringing the whole group together. We'll take a field trip down. So you might see us next week. Fingers crossed.
Let us know. We'd love to come by and say hi.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I'm going to stop the recording here. Thank you again for attending. Like I said before, the first of many. I'm hoping we will do this again soon. And maybe we can cover different topics in the future as well.